Okay, so after concluding the Committee of Adjustment meeting, thank you colleagues, we're on to Council. This is Council meeting number 34, of course being held here Wednesday, September 15th at 6:30 p.m. It is a full agenda and it's great to see people in the chambers as per usual. I'll call the meeting to order and go quickly to the approval of the agenda, and that is that the revised Council agenda for September 15th, 2021 be approved as presented. Colleagues, can I look for a motion for the adoption of the agenda, please? Councillor Sharkyan and Deputy Mayor, thank you very much. Any questions or concerns in regards to tonight's very full agenda? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All in favor, please. Thank you. Next, of course, is our consent agenda. As you know, we've moved to a consent agenda to create some efficiencies and adopt items wholesale for which discussion is not necessarily warranted unless a council member would like to pull an item from the consent agenda. So to that end, I just see minutes from August 11th, 2021. Does any council member request removal of a consent agenda item at this time? Seeing none, I will then ask if there are no objections, these items will be approved, and I believe I'll need a motion. Councillor Barclay? Councillor Sullivan, would you like to move that, please? Councillor Barclay, are you with us? Yeah? Okay. And then I'll call the question on the consent agenda. All in favor, please? Good, thank you. Moving on. We will go to staff reports, and this evening we do have one important report from the Office of the Chief Administrative Officer, and that is in regards to the Provincial Proof of Vaccination Program. So I'll fire it over to you, Mr. Dyke. Go ahead. You will need to be mic'd for the purposes of the live stream.
Yeah, we're good.
We're good?
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a twofold report for Council and the public to provide a bit of an update on the impact of the new provincial regulations regarding the vaccine certification program or proof of vaccination program, depending on which terminology you want to use. The bulk of the program that was announced on the 1st of September, and yesterday the province actually released the regulations pertaining to vaccinations within the public. The legislation itself pertains primarily on what they deem to be high-risk indoor public settings, restaurants, food and drink establishments, meeting areas, spaces, more importantly to the municipality specifically, indoor recreation facilities, theaters, and things of that nature. In dealing with our recreation facilities, it is our obligation with the province to implement the regulations that put down by the province. So with respect to the operation of the arenas going forward, proof of vaccination will be required to access the arena for all adults and with an exemption for youth sport. And the province has further defined that youth sport is anybody actively participating in the event itself under the age of 18, between 12 and 18. So anybody else will require proof of vaccination to enter the arena at that time. It does not pertain to the municipal administrative offices. People can still come to pay taxes, go to the counter service or other non-recreation related services without providing proof of vaccination. However, all existing COVID related protocols, masking, distancing will apply as we move forward. It's important to note as putting forward on the recreation programs, immediately after the province made their announcement, the Ontario Minor Hockey Association, Ontario Women's Hockey Association made it a mandatory requirement for vaccinations for anybody participating within their programming. And I believe that the Eastern Ontario or Hockey East group is still deciding that now, which would affect a lot of the players in our area as well. So there is some synergies between the provincial piece and the youth hockey pieces as well. And I think it's important to note is in the facility we're in now, the Armadillo Arts Center, it would be subject to proof of vaccination for events other than council meetings. So municipal council meetings would not be required to provide proof of vaccination, but any theater event would require proof of vaccination to attend as well. With respect to that impact on our operations, we are expected to implement the policies of the regulations of the province at our facilities. We are currently investigating the means by which to do the screening at the door of the facilities as we move forward, and we'll provide if there's any budgetary impact, that we'll provide information to council that hopefully at the meeting in October we'll be able to figure that part of it out. The second part of the discussion tonight pertains to an employee vaccination policy. It's been determined we have an obligation as an employer, as an organization, to provide all necessary precautions to protect the health and safety of our employees as well as members of the public. And parting that in dealing with the medical officer of health and the province as a whole, one of the best ways of providing this service to our thing is encouraging vaccinations amongst the public and our staff. The policy itself will make vaccinations mandatory for municipal staff effective September 30th. Effective September 22nd, excuse me, with all staff required to provide proof of vaccination by October 30th. As we move forward, the proof of vaccination, it will be done in a way that is consistent with the privacy regulations with respect to medical information that will be done through confidential process within the municipality itself. And that information will be provided by a set date to the manager of human resources for the municipality. With respect to, as other municipalities in Ontario have done, we have a bit of a hybrid model where for employees who are not vaccinated or are not willing to provide proof of vaccination, they will be limited access to the facility subject to regular testing, which is the rapid COVID testing that will occur on multiple times during the week or at the discretion of the municipality. Will be required to continue to wear their PPE or their mask with all municipal facilities and may be denied access to certain common areas of the municipality, such as the lunchroom and other areas of high traffic areas within the facility itself. The policy also recognizes the legal exemptions in areas of medical exemptions and human rights concerns. There's a process set up for that. The province has stipulated there are only 2 valid medical exemptions for proof of vaccination, and those will be the ones that will be followed by the municipality as we go forward. We do feel that our policies are in keeping with our goal to maintain and move forward on protecting the health and safety of not only our employees, but also the community as well. It is our goal, and all the policies that council has endorsed going forward with respect to early on the closing of the office, the mask requirements and things of that nature and restrictions within our facilities, is to help us move forward through this pandemic as quickly as possible or as efficiently as possible, and do everything we can to prevent any further economic shutdowns or any other further restrictions put on the community itself. And we feel this is a good way to move that piece forward. With that, Your Worship, I'll take any questions with respect to the impact on our operations and on the vaccination policy.
Thank you. Colleagues, I know this is a rapidly evolving area because of the recent announcement by the province of Ontario, so it may be natural that you would have questions. Anything at this stage? I see Councillor Barclay to start. Go ahead, Councillor Barclay.
Yeah, I just want to confirm that any of the screening that takes place here at the municipal center would also apply to Maplewood Hall. That is another recreational facility that we have. Would that be included or excluded?
Through Your Worship, yes. So any recreation facility that is that we run that brings members of the public, it would be subject to the same screening protocols, and proof of vaccination would be required. One of the areas we're still looking at is we have some rental facilities for community use, and we're still waiting to get clarification on whose responsibility is for proof of vaccination. The person that's renting the facility or the municipality is responsible for ensuring proof of vaccination for anybody that attends under the rental agreement, and we're still seeking clarification on that portion of it.
Councillor Sullivan, please.
Thank you. Could I ask if this same policy then will apply to the public library?
Under the Public Libraries Act, our municipal policies don't have jurisdiction over the library. That'll be a decision that has to be made by the library board. We have shared our information with Richard Brown, the CEO for the library, and I believe they're dealing with that at their upcoming meeting.
Okay, thank you.
Seeing nothing, thank you. Deputy Mayor, go ahead.
Yeah, through your worship, just a clarification on the hockey arenas. Everybody 18 and older, I believe, has to show proof. What about spectators? I wasn't clear on that.
Yes, through your worship, to the Deputy Mayor. Yes, so the exemption under the provincial regulations only applies to the youth that are actually participating in the event. So take the example of the arena, it's those participating in the hockey itself, be it practice or game, they are exempt from proof of vaccination. But if anybody from the age of 12 to 18 is a spectator, or would be a spectator or a guest, they would be subject to vaccination. There are some nuances to the regulations that we're working our way through, but any adult would be required to provide proof of vaccination in the arena, in the recreation facility.
And that piece is provincially mandated or municipally mandated?
All the policies with respect to the arena are implementation of the provincial regulations.
Okay, so those are province-wide?
That's correct.
Effectively?
That's correct.
Okay. And the exemption, of course, is also provincially stipulated for kids participating in sports under the age of 18 and under?
That's correct. Okay. And as I mentioned in my presentation, some associations have taken upon themselves to actually put a more stringent requirement on than the province has, which is so the OMHA affiliates are requiring that all their participants be vaccinated, notwithstanding age.
Okay. And I'm just scanning the room. Councillor Sullivan, do you want to follow up? Go ahead.
I just have one more question regarding staff who choose not to be vaccinated. They will undergo testing. COVID testing would be rapid testing, random or every day when they enter the facility, and the cost of that will be borne by the municipality. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the testing will be mandatory, and we're actually requiring 3 tests per week,
okay.
And the cost will be borne by the municipality.
Okay.
As an employer, it's our obligation, because it's our requirement, we're obligated to provide the testing. And it also allows us to control the test. It's our test, we administer the test, and go from there. But again, with respect to some of the issues that have come up regarding privacy of medical pieces as well, the information from the test, it's point in time. The test is given, it's a rapid test, is given, the result is received, is positive, it's recorded as having taken the test, and the results are destroyed. So we don't keep the record on hand for the test itself, just that the employee did follow the protocols and was tested. In the event, and hopefully we don't run this situation, in the event that an employee does test positive in that situation, they will then be required to go on and take the more fulsome test and won't return to the workplace until they receive a clear test from that regard.
Okay, and they will be on paid sick leave until they return?
In that scenario, they will follow the usual protocol with respect to sick leave.
Okay.
Going forward.
Okay, thank you.
Let me clarify that point, because this is an important point. They will be on sick leave in the time away between the rapid test and I forget the name of the more stringent test. If they test positive for the second test and are forced to be with work, that is not paid leave.
If they're forced to
be away from work as a result of if they're isolated, that is not paid leave.
And the rationale for that would be?
Because of their choice not to become vaccinated.
Okay, but of course the medical and human rights exemptions would not apply in those instances.
That's correct.
Right? So
That's correct.
For those who have a legitimate medical exemption, that scenario wouldn't be in effect.
Any of the qualified exemptions would not
Right.
would not apply.
Right. Of course, we have very high vaccination rates in Eastern Ontario, among the highest in the province, so hopefully this is more moot than not.
That is our hope, and we, from our understanding, is we have a very high vaccination among staff as it is right now. So.
Indeed. I think we're all encouraged by the kind of leadership the community's shown, so many community organizations have shown. So really the effect of the policy tonight, Mr. Dyke, is to define how municipal facilities are accessed by clients, by users who are coming in for a theater production, what have you, and then by employees, correct?
Yes, kind of. The portion with respect to the use of municipal facilities is for information only. It's not subject to municipal policy. It's the implementation of the provincial policy. The request of council tonight is to receive that as information, but to approve the employee vaccination policy.
Indeed, okay, because workplaces are exempt under the provincial legislation, so it's incumbent upon workplaces to develop their own policies?
That's correct.
Okay, okay. And when do you expect to inform staff of the policy? Obviously, for those who may not have been vaccinated, and I assume it's an extremely small minority, what's your timeline?
I have an all-staff meeting scheduled for 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, where we'll walk staff through the policy and provide them all the information needed with respect to the policy and its implications and where they fit into it, and the specific dates regarding the proof of vaccination. I believe it's they have to provide their documentation to us by October 30th.
Proof of two vaccinations or one?
Fully vaccinated, 2 vaccinations.
Okay. But can you actually vaccinate that quickly if you don't have your first vaccine?
It's our understanding that it is possible to meet the October 30 deadline. We are also
October 30th or September 30th?
October 30th
October.
deadline.
Got
And
it.
we're also, for employees that are in the process of being vaccinated, well, that will be taken into consideration going forward.
Okay. Colleagues, Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Madam Mayor, just another quick question. Does this policy include council? We're not really staff, but we are on the payroll to a degree. So I was just wondering how that covers us.
For a number of legislative reasons, it does not include members of council. Members of council are not defined as employees. Some municipalities have taken upon themselves to create a second policy for council, would basically mirror one. And the reason being, there is no, for better or worse, there is no discipline applicable to members of council through the Municipal Act.
You mean consequence, a consequence.
Words are important, Your Worship, and so yes, there are no consequences, no direct consequences from the policy, and so the municipalities, I think the City of London had just passed a policy specific to council members, which just ties it back to the Code of Conduct. If that's a direction of council, it would not be very difficult for us to pull one together for council's consideration.
I understand that all of council is double vaxxed. I don't think we have that at play. Can I confirm that? I think we're all double vaccinated. We can nod on that? Okay. Okay. Thank you. So if you come in to buy a bag tag or pay a bill, you do not need to show proof of vaccination. Is that correct?
That is correct.
If you want to come in and watch a 73s game, you will need to show proof of vaccination.
That is correct.
As a dictate by the province in that instance.
That's correct.
If you are working as a municipal employee by virtue of providing a safe workplace, you will be required to show proof of vaccination unless a medical or human rights exemption applies.
Or subject to the rapid testing protocols.
Right. So the alternative is that you're masked, you wear PPE if appropriate, and you get tested.
And maybe excluded from
Common
accessing certain
Yeah.
places in the building, yes.
Okay. Okay. Okay, colleagues, I think that's the summary. Anything else? Okay, I'll look for a mover then for the policy. Thank you. I've got Deputy Mayor, and I'll take Councillor Sullivan, and I'll look to my motion, and that is that Council receive this staff report titled Provincial Proof of Vaccination Program Update and Municipal Employee Vaccination Policy, and approve the Municipal Employee Vaccination Policy as presented. One other question, Mr. Dyke. I know you've been doing a scan of other municipalities. Where do we fit in the landscape of province of Ontario in terms of policies that are akin to this one?
I think from our research done, we've taken the hybrid model, which was adopted by some of the larger centers like Mississauga, Brampton, regional Waterloo municipalities, where they allow the testing piece. The City of London, the City of Toronto, and York Region have taken a more stringent approach where they do not allow the testing piece. It's either be vaccinated or don't report to work. We landed on the hybrid model.
Okay. And where is the City of Ottawa? Do
City
you
of
know?
Ottawa, we believe, is the same as the City of Toronto with respect to the no testing option, but we've heard it hasn't been passed yet. They're still working on it, I believe.
And clearly, this is being informed by complex human resourcing and human rights legislation, I assume. Yeah. Okay. We have the motion by Deputy Mayor and Councillor, was it Councillor Barclay? I apologize. Councillor Sullivan, I know, and I need a second. Okay. Thank you. All right, so I'll call the question. All in favor, colleagues? Thank you. Okay.
With your permission, Your Worship, I'll leave the planning meeting in the capable hands of Director Martin.
You don't want to stay for the fun?
No.
Okay,
Thank you.
okay, thanks. Okay, great. Yes, indeed, thank you. So we'll now go on to our first public meeting. I know there are many of you here for, I think, different public meetings and different discussions, so thank you for your patience. We'll do our best to get through as quickly as we can. I think council will have some questions, of course, but I'll open up the first one, and I believe this is in regards to part of Lot 25, Concession 2 from rural RU to Highway Commercial Holding C3H. So anyway, we'll get to that. Council will now hold a public meeting to consider an application of the lands on the southern half of the subject site located on County Road 43, part of Lot 25, Concession 2, from rural RU to highway commercial. I must advise you that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns if an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this public meeting or written submissions. Before this evening, the local planning appeal tribunal may refuse to consider objections. Any persons who wish further notice of council's decision concerning this matter should give their name, address, and postal code to the Deputy Director of Planning, Crystal Landstra, following adjournment. Are there people here for this particular public meeting? If you could raise your hands. Okay, I've got 3, is that right? I'm counting 3? Okay, thank you. I will now pass the meeting over to Director of Planning, and of course after that we'll hear from members of the public. Thank you. Welcome, Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. It's certainly nice to be back face to face instead of our virtual meetings, and I actually get to control my slides. It's nice not having to say next slide every 30 seconds. So our first application of many tonight is to consider the rezoning of the property. Just for context sake, I'll speak to terms of what's in the area. I mean, as planners, we like to say like what's nearby. It's the property that's located to. Sorry, I lost
That's
my.
me. I apologize. Keep going. Keep going.
I'm not used to being cut off. No, I'm kidding.
I wasn't cutting you off.
No,
Okay,
I
go
tease.
ahead.
I always get teased for how much planners like to talk. So sometimes I do understand the need for that button. So the property is located just to the west of the Food Basics and immediately to the east of what will be the Oxford Village subdivision. The property is currently undeveloped and is vacant. So the proposed, here's just an aerial photograph of the lot. There has been some clearing on the property, so it's no longer treed, but the intent is to have it developed for future commercial uses. So the zoning will only apply to the front portion of the property. The front portion of the property is indicated in the red hatching is designated as highway commercial under our official plan. So the implementing zoning bylaw amendment would recognize the and conform to the highway commercial designation. Currently it's zoned rural, which does not permit commercial uses. So in essence, we are updating the zoning to match the official plan. So the purpose tonight is to consider the rezoning of the property from rural to highway commercial with a holding. And there's also a zoning provision for a strip of environmental protection land as well. And it's not included within the description here. But the existing, as mentioned, the existing rural zoning does not permit the use of the land for highway commercial purposes. The official plan designation of highway commercial encourages development of the area for commercial establishments serving the motoring public and relying heavily upon automobile traffic for their existence. The current highway commercial zone permits an array of commercial uses such as equipment sales, service commercial, rental uses, gas bars, hotels, and large format retail uses, just to name a few. It is quite an exhaustive list. The balance of the lands will remain in the RU zone with the intent to develop these lands in the future for residential use. And this is in conformity with the fact that the backlands are designated as residential designation. So here's the proposed zoning for being considered tonight. So the front portion of the land would be zoned highway commercial holding, and the holding would require a site plan agreement and the provision of capacity allocation once services are available. And then the environmental protection zone, that is recognizing a buffer around a water course, which is also defined as a headwater drainage feature. So through an environmental impact study, there was a recommendation to reduce, typically we ask for a 30-meter setback from our water courses, but the study, and through the support of the RVCA, agreed to a 15-meter setback. So that would create essentially a 10-meter buffer setback on this property. In speaking with the applicant's planner, there are concerns about putting that EP protection zoning on there. So at this time, they have requested that if we could defer the decision on this matter to allow for staff and the RVCA and the applicant and their planner just to discuss how we're going to deal with the environmental protection zoning categorization on the property, just to ensure that if there is future development and that water course is relocated or no longer there, that we're not creating an unnecessary zoning issue that we'll have to go back and correct.
Can I
Yep.
just ask a quick question? Can you tell us exactly what's over there? Is that a cluster of residential homes?
Sorry,
To your left, yeah, right there.
all this?
Yes.
That is, so our parcel mapping is based off the former plan that was for the Oxford Village subdivision when it was the rural plan of subdivision. It just hasn't been updated, but Oxford Village, the 398 units would be located in here,
So then Food Basics is to your,
right here.
got it, I
Yeah,
see.
sorry, yeah, it's just the context of where it is. Yeah, and this is the roundabout, this is Pine Hill Road. I believe on our master plan, it shows eventually this opening up as a roadway. So in the future, if there is a roadway opened up there, the water course would have to be relocated and a compensation plan put in place. And this is sorry, I should also note, this is an unopened and unmaintained municipal road allowance.
Okay, you can carry on.
So the recommendation to approve is, as I said, staff are recommending that we defer this decision to allow for the applicant and their consultants to work with the RVCA and the municipality just to address the EP zoning on the property. And we would ask that the matter be referred to our October meeting. So staff would come back with a supplemental report for council's further consideration after we've had time to further discuss that environmental protection zone.
So you are seeking a deferral of the entire motion this evening?
Yes, at this time, should council choose to. It is within council's right, based on the proposed zoning, to move forward if you should want to make a decision tonight. But staff are recommending at this time that we refer the matter to the October meeting just to allow for additional time to address the environmental protection zone at the request of the applicant.
Okay, colleagues, to that end, we would not be looking to approve and enact bylaw 8421. You are seeking a deferral.
That is correct, Your Worship.
So just a question regardless. Why would this property owner only seek to rezone half the property? And why the front half, not the back half? I assume because you have some concerns about that back half because of the environmental considerations, or is it just because of reflections on how it might be used for more residential purposes? Can you give us any insight?
So it was through the pre-consultation process that we had asked that the front lands be addressed first. And once more fulsome plans came forward for how the back portion would be developed from a residential perspective, that we would entertain a zoning bylaw amendment to address the residential portion. So typically, we'd like to see more of a developed site plan in that regard, as to whether they're going to go through like a plan of subdivision or through a plan of condominium, or if they're going to be using it for say multi-residential uses. And the intent behind that is if there's any additional reliefs that we need to provide through the zoning bylaw, we can address it at that time. So that was just the recommendation, that we address the fact that the lands at the front are accessible off of County Road 43, where the residential lands at the back, depending on how, I know Depenser comes out here and runs through the OVI lands, but these are undeveloped, and the unopened road allowance, how that's developed to provide further access to the rear lands.
Okay, and are the applicants and members of the public who are here this evening, forgive me, I don't know exactly who you are they aware that you're seeking a deferral, or is this a surprise?
The applicant, through their consultant, have asked for the deferral. They are here tonight. If they would, they have the right to speak to the file at the time that
Perfect.
indicated.
So we'll carry on,
Yep.
right? Because we are in a public meeting. So I see someone standing, and I assume that is the applicant, is that right? Okay,
This is Mr. Paul Black. He is the planning consultant on the file.
okay. Councilor Barclay.
Yeah, before we go to the applicant, just a question for Director Martin. What's the rationale originally for setting aside that as an environmental protection zone?
My understanding is that there was an environmental impact study done on that, the water course, because I believe, and Mr. Batchelor from the Conservation Authority is here tonight, that, and I'll look for a nod, that that water course is considered a drainage headwater feature? Yep. So that, the study recommended, so typically our setback, we seek a 30-meter setback from, water courses. That report was done to seek a reduction down to 15 meters. That water course is 5 meters on the other side of the property line, so essentially there's still a 10-meter buffer on this lot. The concern is just with putting it in an environmental protection zone, if there's the consultant on the file would like to seek additional time to discuss if there's another way and how we can address that through the zoning in the event that if the water course is relocated and no longer there, we've just created a redundancy in the zoning.
Councilor Sullivan?
Thank you. Through you to Director Martin. Can you just tell me then, why does this environmental protection zone only go like 3/4 of the way back the side of the lot? Is that because that's where the water course ends? And you mentioned that roundabout at Food Basics, it does appear that there is a road allowance going straight back parallel to that environmental protection zone, to then would be to access the potential residential properties at the back end of that property. So does that, where is that water course with respect to the environmental protection zone? Is it on the side where the roadway would be?
So it's located within the unopened and unmaintained road allowance. Unfortunately, I don't have a better map that I could use to demonstrate its location, but it is not on the property, but the buffer zone from it is located, it does extend into the lot. So the municipality was in trying to find a solution as to how we can ensure that that buffer is noted. That's why the request was for the environmental protection zone, and I do apologize. The deputy director had worked on this file, but she sends her regrets that she could not attend tonight. But that was her recommendation, that as a way of trying to recognize that buffer. But the consultant for the applicant is asked to see if there's another solution as to how we can address it. And staff are confident that we can find a resolution with working through the RVCA as to how we address the zoning bylaw amendment itself. Maybe not in lieu of the EP zone, but if there's specific wording we can amend into the bylaw amendment itself to better address the concerns that the consultant and the applicant have raised.
But it doesn't need to go all the way to the back of the property?
My understanding, it's the length of the feature.
Okay.
And then I believe, sorry, Councillor Sullivan, it's hard to see from this distance, but I think this is the continuation of the tributary. And
Okay.
Mr. Batchelor is nodding yes, that I am correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I know the applicant is here. I just have one question. So the Conservation Authority has yet to weigh in on this issue, or they're being actively consulted now?
In the past, they've been actively consulted, and they were supportive of reducing, typically what we ask for from a water course is 30 meters, and the supporting report recommended a 15-meter setback. So the RVCA is satisfied that that's an appropriate setback recommendation. But what I'm recommending is that in order to ensure that we protect that setback requirement at the request of the consultant and the applicant, that we discuss with the RVCA just some appropriate wording we could add in to ensure that we're adequately addressing it without having to put an environmental protection zoning on the property.
Because this land is adjacent to the Oxford Village lands where there's a passive wetland of some significance, correct?
Yes, there's a locally significant wetland. It's in the Northwest Quad. There's actually quite a significant wetland complex, and that would be located further up here. It would be considered off the screen, but it's more further up.
But there must be some relationship between them? between
I believe that
watercourse and
this
wetlands?
sorry, Your Worship, I believe that the headwater feature does go into the wetland complex that's located within what we consider the Northwest Quad.
Okay, all right. Other questions, colleagues? Seeing none, then we'll invite the applicant to come down. We are still in the public meeting, even if we do defer the motion. Welcome.
It's been a while since I've done this. My name is Paul Black. I'm an associate with Foten Planning and Design. We are representing the property owner, which is USD Group, on these applications. So, as Ms. Martin explained, I guess in our opinion, the EP3 zone is a bit of a over protection, I guess, of that corridor. So the, as Ms. Martin explained, the environmental impact statement identified this corridor and identified a 15-meter setback requirement. As noted, the RVCA approved that reduced setback requirement. But the environmental protection zone is really intended to protect wetlands, in my opinion, not this sort of tributary. And so it carries with it a fair few restrictions in terms of what can be done in and around it. And so I think, or we think that there's a better solution to the zoning, potentially through the holding symbol that's already on the property, or in some other form through an exception that would identify the requirement for the 15-meter setback from the center line of the watercourse, and that would alleviate any requirement to rezone the lands in the future if the municipality does proceed to extend Pine Hill to the north, which would remove the watercourse, but wouldn't rezone this property. So even if the watercourse is removed, the EP zone would restrict any development on that portion of the property, and that's really what we're trying to avoid, is having to come back in the future to seek an amendment for this 10-meter wide swath of land that the zoning actually already requires that we protect. So it's we feel like there's an alternative solution here, and so that's what Ms. Martin and I discussed, is working with the RVCA and the client to determine an appropriate way to protect it and allow development to proceed.
And is the removal of the watercourse foreseen? Who can speak to that?
The removal of the watercourse would occur in the event that Pine Hill Road is extended north, and as through that development process, there would be a compensation plan to recognize that removal. But
that is
it would
not a
have
done deal. That's something that could happen, but may not happen. Is that right?
down the road. It's a potential if that section, the north section of Pine Hill Road, is developed. There would have to be consideration, because there is a water course through there for its whether it's its relocation or a compensation plan as to how you address that impact.
Okay. Other questions, Councillor Barclay?
I guess it's more of a comment, but in the absence of a stormwater master plan for the urban service area, I'm not inclined to give up any kind of protection we have for water courses, but I'm hoping that you can come back in October with something that would be acceptable. Thank you.
And the Conservation Authority would further comment, correct? I mean, they have the expertise in terms of how to protect our water courses. Is that the case?
They do. We typically rely on the RVCA through their mandates as well to provide the review service and recommendations around our water courses and our environmental features. So to that end, through consultation with Mr. Black, it was recommended that we work with the RVCA just to ensure that they are satisfied with any zoning provisions coming forward that would speak to the water course. Typically, we are able to find some resolution by working together and through consultation with Mr. Batchelor at the RVCA to wording that would be to their satisfaction. And the other benefit here is that development of this land, because they are commercial lands, would require site plan control. So it's just, again, that further mechanism that we can use to ensure protection of that water course feature.
Okay. Okay. And is the property owner in the room this evening, or are you the?
He is, yeah. He's one of the other members of the public who's here today.
Okay.
Just on the, you had a question, Your Worship, about the lands to the north, and Ms. Martin explained why we haven't rezoned those lands at this point, but yeah, the intention would be to come back in the future with a plan of subdivision or some application with a concept for the development of those lands, which would resolve things like access and street layout and all that sort of thing, which would then be accompanied by a zoning bylaw amendment to implement an appropriate zone.
So we're talking about at this stage, a combination of commercial and residential.
On the red hatching, it would simply be a commercial development.
I mean, on the latter half, right?
That's right. It would
Remaining
be
half.
likely
The
residential.
vision is residential.
And that's what the official plan calls for.
Okay, excellent. Right. Okay. Well, I'm prepared to defer. I do think council has a high bar, right? We know this entire area is very sensitive, right? And the adjacent developer has been subject to fairly strict provisions in terms of protecting some of the passive active wetlands. I don't know how formally recognized they are by the province, but nonetheless, we look forward to further discussion. Is there any member of the public that wishes to speak in regards to this development? Okay. You'll have to come to the front. Thank you. So before we move on, I'll have to close the meeting. I'm just going to canvass colleagues. Do we all have an appetite to defer on this one? Okay. Yeah. As a member of the public, you're here to speak on this. Go for it. Welcome. Yeah, just hit your mic. There you go.
Geraldine Taylor from 2416 County Road 18. I'm just curious as to where the watercourse starts. Like it appears on that map that it just appears a little block of water. Where does it begin? And if you put that under, or it disappears, or it's, how does it connect to the properties to the south? Who can answer that?
Ms. Martin, you want to take a crack?
Yeah, without the benefit of having my full GIS system out to actually see where the water course is, I can't really pinpoint it on a map as to where it goes to the southern portion. I don't know if Mr. Batchelor would be able to come forward and provide us maybe with some indication, because he is quite familiar with the water course.
Right, and my understanding is it used to run across 43, the frontage of that land, to the property just south of there. There's a piece of land that is marked between Rona's and the Tim Hortons. And the water course went right to that line when I last looked at the map.
Okay. So we're welcoming Mr. Batchelor from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, welcome.
Thanks, Your Worship. So just to give you a bit more of a description, the connectivity of that watercourse, there is a small area where it does connect through roadside ditches, and then it goes across the street, the roadway, County Road 43, and then it connects through in behind I believe it's the Kempville Mall, and then it continues towards lands near Pine Hill, and the beginning is on lands near Pine Hill. So that's where it does begin, and then it does continue through that site, and then it continues further to the adjacent site, which was the Glenview Kyvan subdivision.
Okay. And are you optimistic there's another way to go about this in terms of this particular?
There are a couple of different methods that we've had discussions in previous meetings. There is an opportunity to relocate that subject to compensation. So it's just a matter of determining whether it's going to remain in its place and then what protection is required if it remains, or what kind of mechanisms are required if it is relocated.
Okay. Any questions? Okay. Thank you. Thank you for your question. Is there anyone else, because we are still in the public meeting, that wishes to speak to this? I'm canvassing the room. Seeing nothing, then I will take the opportunity to remind anyone here or anyone watching that should you wish to provide written comment regarding the proposed zoning bylaw amendment, which sounds like it might change, certainly you can do so after the public meeting is adjourned. And it is now intended the council will defer the proposed zoning bylaw amendment until the October meeting. So with that in mind, colleagues, I'll close this public meeting. Thank you. So we'll move on to our next public meeting, and forgive me, I am Oh, I do. Okay, I didn't understand that. Councillor Barclay, would you like to move to defer? Okay. Councillor Sullivan, seconder? Okay, I'm going to call the question on the deferral. All in favor? Thank you. Moving on, I'm legally mandated to read all of this text for every public meeting, so I appreciate your patience. Now, council will hold a public meeting to consider an application for the lands located at 646 River Road from Highway Commercial C310 to Highway Commercial Special Exception C310 to permit up to 4 residential units. I must advise you that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns, and if an appellant does not provide oral submissions at the meeting or written submissions before council adopts the proposed amendment, the local planning appeal tribunal may refuse to consider objections. Any persons who wish further notice of the council's decision should give, obviously, name, address, and postal code to the Deputy Director of Planning, or, in fact, in this case, Ms. Martin, who's here this evening. Are there people here for this public meeting? Scanning the room. Okay, thank you. I think 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I'll pass this over to Ms. Martin, and then once we've heard the staff report, questions from council, we'll invite applicants and members of the public to speak. Fire away, Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. So our second zoning bylaw amendment being considered tonight is for lands that are located on River Road. A portion of the property is located within the hamlet area of Burritts Rapids, and a portion is located outside of the hamlet area. Many people would be familiar with this property as the former Lock 17 restaurant. The front, like I said, the front portion is developed for, it has a existing 2-story building, and then the back portion of the lands are not utilized. So the intent of the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would just be to amend the C3-10 zone, so it's a highway commercial zoning, to the front portion of the lands to permit the conversion of the existing building to allow for 4 residential units. Currently, the residential unit is located in the upper story, and a zoning bylaw amendment is required to facilitate the conversion of this building. So the existing the existing structure is a 2-story commercial building that has sat vacant. We do have the property owner here and the applicant, as well as their consultant, who are here to seek the creation of up to 4 residential units, filling a very needed gap within our community. The use of the building, like I mentioned, has sat vacant for a while, so they've seen the opportunity to repurpose it for residential purposes. We will maintain the residential uses in the zoning on the property, and this is to ensure that we continue to have the compliance with the commercial designation within the hamlet of Burritts Rapids. So Burritts Rapids, as one of our smaller hamlets, has kind of more developed policies, just given the nature of the community. So the commercial policies would support, again, the small uses on the property that were there, which include the establishment of a restaurant. There is adequate parking. There's a large gravel pad which has 26 parking spots, so would be more than ample to facilitate 4 residential apartment units. So again, here the proposed zoning bylaw amendment would add a provision to the C3-10 zone to permit up to 4 residential dwelling units on the property, in addition to the limited commercial uses that are dictated by that zone. So at this time, staff are requesting that council approve and enact bylaw 8521 to amend the zoning for the property to allow for those 4 units to be created. Thank you.
Okay. Do we know, are they 1-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units? Was that discussion had?
I would invite either the applicant or their consultant to come down to answer the question in regards to the units to be created.
Okay. Would the applicant like to come forward? Council colleagues, any other questions on Ms. Martin's report in this regard? Go ahead, Councillor Barclay.
Yeah, through you, Madam Mayor. Just a clarification. So we're basically taking a commercial zone and adding an amendment to accommodate 4 residential units. We're not converting it to a residential zoning. It's going to remain a commercial zone, plus with the amendment to allow 4 residents.
Through your worship, that is correct.
Okay, welcome. Hi.
Hi, sorry, what was the question?
Oh, the question
Oh.
was, what kind of residential units are you
Yes.
envisioning?
So we discussed back and forth with the township, town and us and the planner, and it's going to be three bedroom and two bedroom, because we don't want to get in too much, but at the same time, we've also recognized that there are a lot of families that need places, and it's not just single individuals. Just to, I don't know if you're aware, but there's already a residential unit upstairs. So that will remain as is, and we're just taking that big empty space that's been abandoned for more than a year now, and just do something with it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. And you are with
Rasna.
Just Right Rentals for
Yes,
Inc.? That's who? Okay.
Rasna Arora and my husband, Pierre.
Okay, welcome. And you must have other properties throughout Ontario? Do you have other properties?
Oh, we live in Ottawa, and
Okay.
we invest in and around Ottawa.
Okay,
So
excellent.
it's just the two of us. We try to find places that need help, and we don't like to tear things down. So we try to keep whatever the structure is and create something within that is of use to everybody.
Okay. And would you anticipate building more in the future on this property?
We have no such plans right now, but we don't want to limit ourselves and say, oh, we won't.
Right.
But that's a whole different process if it ever happens.
Okay.
Right now, we just want to do this current one. The tenant upstairs is waiting not to be the only one living there.
It's a beautiful spot. They have a beautiful view.
It is, yeah, he's just the only one.
Okay. Councillor Strakian?
Thank you very much. A question for you regarding these will be rental units, is that
Yes,
correct?
yes.
And does this fit into our current planning with respects to affordable housing and so on, that this would be, because it's a rental property, does fit into that model?
We are not getting any grants from the government, so it will be based on whatever, whatever it costs to get that and whatever the current market.
It's going to be based on the current market?
Correct.
Okay.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Amy, of course, we have an affordable housing policy in development for, I think, new and existing developers. So can you help me out in terms of reconciling our affordable housing policies with this?
So currently, we rely on the policies established within the official plan. At this time, there are no mechanisms that would trigger the ability to require the units to be affordable, which is typically through the density bonusing provisions within the official plan. But we are looking at implementing and furthering the creation of our affordable housing recommendations and strategy through the creation of an affordable housing policy that's more fulsome, which is being presented later tonight to council.
Okay, so with that in mind, does that then trigger a conversation in regards to this development?
Based on our current policy, I don't have the mechanism in which I could require it, but it's certainly a conversation that we can have with the property owner, just given the situation with affordable housing, not just in North Grenville, but across the province of Ontario. But again, until I have a more fulsome policy in place, that gives me a little bit more teeth to start seeking more requirements around affordable housing. We just do it on we don't have those mechanisms, just on a good faith conversation.
Okay, well, I look forward to you having that conversation. As you know, affordable housing is a priority, and we love a mix where you have both affordable rents and market rents, because we find that presents, I think, a more suitable environment sometimes for families, seniors, et cetera. There's no doubt there's a big need. So I'm sure you'll have that conversation with Ms. Martin in due time. Okay. Colleagues, I will look to others. Are there others who would like to speak? We are in a public meeting. Seeing no one. So no one wishes to speak. Council colleagues, is there anything else this evening?
Just another question through you, Madam Mayor, to the Director. Do we not have currently, before we pass the implementation of the Affordable Housing Task Force recommendations, do we not have any incentives, such as waiving building permits, et cetera, to encourage affordable housing?
So one of the recommendations within the strategy was a development of a community improvement plan focusing solely on affordable housing, which is where you would need to set those parameters in order to provide that kind of funding. So you'd have to have a program that outlines it and then dedicated council funds to cover those costs.
Or maybe down the road, we can create a building where there's more land there, but
Right, I would
Different
actually like to
conversation.
amend this motion to say that, Ms. Martin, you should have that discussion with the property owner, right? We are trying to set a standard for all developers across North Granville. So it would seem odd to me that this discussion wouldn't be had, given the urgency of the matter in North Granville. I mean, we're obviously, as you appreciate, having that conversation, insisting on that conversation with every other developer. So it would seem odd that it wouldn't happen in this context. These are valuable rental units that I'm sure will attract so many different applicants once they're built, because the need is really great. So to that end, I see a motion here that says council approve and enact bylaw 8521 to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw for lands located at 646 River Road, to amend the C310 zoning to permit up to 4 residential units. But I think I'd like to propose a caveat that council approve and enact bylaw 8521 to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw, as well as have a discussion on a affordable housing element for the lands located at 646 River Road. Council colleagues, are you good with that? Council Strakian?
Madam Mayor, that just sounds like they're going to talk about something. That doesn't sound like a commitment to a plan for affordable housing. So I think that perhaps the wording, if we want to insist on affordable housing there, needs to have some more teeth to it.
I welcome other language.
I'm not good on the fly on these ones, let me think. Basically something to the effect that there would be a commitment
Incorporate.
to some level of affordable housing within those units, and whatever proportion that is. But I guess if it's just a conversation, I don't think that that's necessarily going to get us further than this current.
Yeah, I think that's fair. So I think what we're asking, actually, Ms. Martin, is that the threshold right now is 25%. So that's not all units, that's one unit. So we would be looking to approve and enact bylaw 8521 to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw with the establishment of an affordable housing imperative of 25%. That's what we're asking other developers to do, and that's what our own official plan stipulates. Are we comfortable with that, colleagues? That's the language. I'll look for a mover. Councillor Strakian? Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Okay. No seconder? I can't second as chair, I don't believe. Okay. So then that dies on the vine. Thank you, Councillor Strakian, for your efforts. So we'll go back to the initial motion that council approve and enact bylaw 8521. I'm not going to read it again. For lands located at 646 River Road. So is anyone moving that?
Could I have a recorded vote on this one?
Yes. Councillor Barclay, and I'll move for a seconder. Okay. Okay, and I will have Jess call for a recorded vote. I think, Ms. Martin, you understand our consternation on this. I think we've assumed, or certainly Councillor Strachey and I have assumed, that there is some affordable housing provision for newly established rental units. So it would be good for us to better understand how policies apply fairly to all those who are looking to develop. But with that said, I'll turn over to Jess for a recorded vote.
Councillor Barclay? Oh,
I actually think we should let Jess. Okay.
Councillor Barclay?
We are voting on
For
the
or
amendment. Yeah, I'm for the.
against?
I had no mover for the amendment. We're back to the original motion.
Yeah,
I had no
okay.
seconder, rather, for the amendment.
You need a seconder for, I'm sorry, I'm lost.
We're back to the original motion with no affordable housing stipulation.
And we have a mover and seconder for
We
it.
do.
Okay, I'm in favor.
Deputy Mayor?
Yay.
Councillor Stracher-Yan?
Nay.
Councillor O'Sullivan?
Yay.
Mayor Peckford?
Nay. Okay, I think the motion passes. Again, we appreciate your goodwill. We know you'll build wonderful rental units.
Thank you.
But there is a fairness factor, and there's also where do these things fit in what is a more ambitious policy for the municipality. So
Thank you.
we wish you all the best.
Thank you very much.
And I'm sure you'll be back talking to us once the
I hope
units
so.
are up and running.
Absolutely.
For
Thank
sure.
you.
Okay. All right, so now that motion is passed, and I guess I will be closing the public meeting, which I think I could have done before the motion, but there it is. We've dealt with that, council. I'm going to take us through one more public meeting, and then we're going to take a break, because we've got a long list here. Council will now hold a public meeting to consider an application to amend zoning on the southern section of the subject site located at 2205 Bedell Road from agricultural A1 to agricultural A2 to prohibit residential uses on the retained parcel pursuant to the conditions of consent file number B2121. I must advise you that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this public meeting or written submissions before council adopts the amendment, LPAT may refuse to consider their objections. Any persons who wish further notice of the meetings can do so by approaching Ms. Martin following adjournment. Are there people here for this public meeting? I see no one. Okay, so I'll pass it over to Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. Our final zoning bylaw amendment of this evening is for the property located at 2205 Bedell Road. The property is actively being farmed. There's also a existing residence on the property. So the subject of the zoning bylaw amendment tonight, it comes out of the provisions of consent file B2121, which is a surplus dwelling severance. As per our policies of the official plan and of the provincial policy statement, surplus dwelling severances in the agricultural designation require us to rezone the retained lands, being the remainder of the agricultural lands, to prohibit future residential development. So the proposed severance severed off the existing house and accessory structures on the lot. So all that will remain is the agricultural lands. And we are recognizing the fact that there is floodplain on the property as well. So that zoning will stay the same. At this time, staff are confident that the proposed zoning bylaw meets the intent of the provincial policy statement, the county official plan, and the local official plan, given that we are rezoning it to prohibit those residential developments as a condition of consent. So tonight, it is recommended by council that bylaw 8621 be passed to rezone the lands that were in the hatched area from the agricultural 1 zone to the agricultural 2 zone to prohibit those residential units. And as well, all flooding and erosion protection zone lands will remain the same, and there's no changes to that zoning provision on the property. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues, any questions for Ms. Martin in regards to this? None? Okay. If there are none, and we don't have the applicant in the room. We have no one in the room on this file. Okay. And there was no concern expressed through notifications that you posted?
We received no comments, Your Worship, on this file. It's rather straightforward. I think people are always happy to see when uses are restricted in this sense to just agricultural activity.
Okay. Colleagues, if there's nothing from the public, which there obviously isn't, then I will close the meeting and look to a mover and a seconder for the council motion. Councillor Sullivan, you're moving? Okay. And I'll look for a seconder. Councillor Barclay, thank you. And that is that council approve and enact bylaw 8621 to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw 5012 for lands located at 2205 Bedell Road to prohibit residential uses on the retained parcel. All flooding and erosion protection zoned lands will remain. So I will call the question on that. All in favor? Good. Okay. Okay. Because we got through that quickly, colleagues, is it your appetite to carry on for a little bit longer? Okay. So then we are going to the matter of the 819 Craig Road, I believe, Ms. Martin. And would you like to present the information on that file for us?
Thank you, Your Worship. So through the applicant, prior to a presentation being given tonight, we've asked that the matter be referred to a future date of council. So we'll bring back this matter for a public meeting. Through consultation with the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority, there were concerns about the proposed development in regard to a water course that's located right on the property boundary. So we were seeking more time to address that with the applicant and the RVCA before we bring back any zoning provision to be considered.
Okay, so nothing really for discussion this evening. Okay, excellent. Colleagues, we'll keep going then? Do we need to move? Okay. There was no motion on the table. We did not introduce a motion, so why are we deferring it? Okay, so I'll look to a mover then. I've got Deputy Mayor and I'll take Councillor Barclay to defer. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Colleagues, do you wish to move on without a break, or do you want to take a short recess? Scanning the room. The next one is a big one, so we can recess midway. Why don't we see how far we get? It is 7:48. Okay, so let's talk about secondary dwelling units, Ms. Martin.
Oh, is there? Yep. Just 2 seconds here. Secondary dwelling units. Sorry, I think you had the right presentation up the first time.
No problem.
We have a lot going on in the planning department. Thank you, Your Worship. So I'm extremely excited tonight to bring forward one of many policy changes that are in line with the recommendations of not only the Mayor's Task Force on Affordable Housing, as well as our own affordable housing strategy that we had completed by Dillon Consulting. I want to put out a really huge thank you to Carl Cannon, past chair of the, or co-chair I should say, of the Mayor's Task Force on Affordable Housing, who provided valuable insight through the creation of this policy recommendation to council and throughout the whole process in regards to our affordable housing strategy. It's been very welcome to have a sounding board to ensure that we're staying on message with the task force recommendations further flown through the strategy recommendations. So a little bit of background. So we are changing the language. Many people would be familiar with what are called second units. Back in January of 2012, so almost 10 years ago, the province introduced into the Planning Act provisions for second units. So this was in response to creating additional residential units within a principal dwelling or within an accessory structure. The limiting language with second units is that you are only permitted one additional unit. So you could have a house with a basement apartment, or you could have a house with a detached garage, with an accessory apartment above the garage, but you could not have both. Our official plan recognizes second units. Our official plan was adopted in 2018, so it was in accordance with the second units that the Planning Act had enacted at the time. The province would further go on to amend the Planning Act in June of 2019 to change the language around second units and introduce language around additional residential units. So from here on out, we will be referring to them as ARUs, or as additional residential units. These changes to the Planning Act have now permitted municipalities, through their policies, their official plan and zoning requirements, to allow for up to 2 additional residential units beyond the principal dwelling. So now you could have a basement apartment as an accessory unit, and as well as that additional unit above a garage or as part of an accessory structure. So again, trying to create more opportunity for housing in communities within our existing structures. I would like to also note that the Mayor's Task Force on Affordable Housing, which was convened, put forth 18 recommendations in March of 2020. This included updating the second unit policies within North Grenville's official plan and zoning bylaw to permit up to 2 additional residential units in line with the provincial changes, and our own affordable housing strategy, which was adopted by council in January of 2021, carried over this recommendation and recommended that we remove some of our restrictive policy. So a little bit about an additional residential unit. It is a type of dwelling unit provided accessory to a principal dwelling unit on the same property, and they're always attributed to a principal dwelling, but they can be either connected or detached. These dwelling units come in many shapes and sizes and are commonly referred to as basement apartments, granny flats, coach homes, in-law suites, tiny homes, garage apartments, modified shipping container dwellings. They go by many names. I threw our current official plan policy up there. I just wanted to demonstrate to council how restrictive working within this policy has been. It's a welcome change to have updated policy which will permit additional residential units. Our current policy, again, recognizes that second unit. So again, that one, but we did have limiting language that required that no more than 40% of the gross floor area of the principal dwelling may have been developed for a second dwelling unit. It's not good practice from a planning perspective to have hard numbers in this case, because it really does limit you if you have an application that exceeds that 40% of the gross floor area. Now, not only do you have to do a zoning bylaw amendment, but technically you're into an official plan amendment for something that we should be making an as of right use and just easier to implement. So our proposed wording it moves away from that second unit policy and adopts the additional residential units. And it's seen as a way, again, to enhance our housing stock. So they will be permitted within a single detached, semi-detached, or townhome, as well as within a primary, within a detached accessory structure on the property that is clearly accessory to the primary residential unit. We will be bringing forth, and I'll get into this later this evening when I go through the implementation of the recommendations, an implementing zoning bylaw amendment to address the details and the requirements for establishing an ARU on a property. Again, they're intended to be subordinate in scale and function to the primary dwelling, and they are to be designed in a manner that is appropriate for the immediate landscape. So by no means are we going to encourage a large accessory structure that is daunting and clouds the landscape. It's again meant to be secondary. And tandem parking will be permitted as a way of providing the parking requirement. And there's additional language as well proposed within the policy that speaks to when they're within a detached unit. So again, we're encouraging them to be in the rear yard, not located, or the side yard, not located closer to the street than the primary dwelling. And they should not be serviced separately from the primary dwelling. And again, trying to make them ineligible for severances, so we're not creating opportunities with second units to create these awkward severance applications that could come forward. And again, we do have provisions for garden suites, so where there is a garden suite, an accessory structure with a secondary dwelling unit would not be permitted because it's already established through that garden suite provision. We did not receive, we did circulate within the paper as per the requirements of the Planning Act. We received a very positive comment from a local builder who is very excited to see that we are implementing these provisions, as well as words of support from the past co-chair of the Mayor's Task Force, Carl Cannon. We also received comments from the counties who raised concern over the fact that the proposed official plan amendment does not conform to the county official plan as it currently stands, and this is in regard to section 2.7.4A of the county official plan, which speaks to second units. It was the opinion of the county planner that the policies pertaining, the definition of a second unit inherent was that it was that one unit. The counties is going through their own task force on affordable housing, and these recommendations will be coming forth to amend their official plan in line with the requirements for additional residential units. So to that end, as my professional opinion is that based on the language within the counties, when I first reviewed it, I didn't see a conflict with their policy. The county planner has a different opinion than I do, but they are the local approval, they are the approval authority, for local official plan amendments. So at this time, we do have two options that council could defer the decision on this matter until such a time that the counties updates their policy, or we could pass it tonight and forward it on to the counties for their ultimate decision, and that could be when their policy is updated, then they'd be able to pass ours. But we're hoping to work with the counties in the interim to see if there's anything we can do to address the policy. But it is my recommendation tonight that council pass the OPA and that it be forwarded on to the counties for further consideration.
Great, thank you. Well, as you know, Ms. Martin, I'm chair of the Affordable Housing Task Force at the counties, 13 mayors, meeting monthly to figure out how we can better facilitate all kinds of affordable housing. And I expect that there will be a strong recommendation from the mayors to update its policies to really effectively reduce the red tape when it comes to people who wish to establish secondary dwelling units within their primary dwelling or on their property. So I'm very inclined to proceed. I do find it a bit ironic that we're having to depend on the United Counties on this instance for what is really a Made in North Grenville solution, but such is the fate of being a lower tier municipality where that happens. That's not unique to North Grenville. It's unique. It applies to any lower tier municipality, of which there are 10, and then by extension another 3 separated municipalities, and we're all touched by sort of the mothership, if you will. But that being said, because we're having a very rigorous secondary dwelling unit conversation at the counties, I do believe it would be appropriate this evening for us to pass this and stimulate further discussion with county colleagues, and hopefully we can land in the right place sooner versus later. And again, it's my understanding from Carl Cannon, who was the co-chair of the Affordable Housing Task Force, that we should be doing everything in our power to allow homeowners or developers to plan for or renovate their homes for secondary dwelling units or their accessory structures, or potentially to add things like a tiny home, which I know is a whole other kettle of fish, but something certainly to be entertained in the future. So I appreciate this report, certainly in the work I've been doing in the context of the county's Affordable Housing Task Force. We've heard from many other counties who have pursued affordable housing strategies across the province, and the secondary dwelling unit strategy is among the most effective, the most efficient, the least expensive, and the most popular, certainly among seniors who are looking to potentially stay in their homes longer, or want to accommodate, kids who are having kids, and the market is so difficult to enter right now. I think there is a real need to ensure that secondary dwelling units are part of the discussion, and we make it as simple as possible for people to do that, while at the same time ensuring a respect for neighbors and neighborhoods and communities writ large. So I think this report is really welcome. Colleagues, any questions on this? Councillor Barclay?
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor, to Ms. Martin. Thank you very much for your hard work in getting this forward. And I agree with the Mayor, we shouldn't wait for the counties to catch up with the work you've done. I think I agree that this will has the potential to bring a lot of housing stock into the market. And as we know, with more stock available, there will be downward pressure on the rents charged with a little bit of competition. So this is a very fast way of getting more units available to people who want to live here. Thanks.
One of the concerns I've heard, and it's not from our own community, believe it or not, it's through the work I'm doing with the counties, is the whole Airbnb phenomenon, and people feeling concerned that secondary units will be leveraged to that end. Does your policy speak to that at all?
The additional residential unit policy does not. Municipalities typically, and this is just more from my research, who have those pressures for more of that Airbnb style of creation of units to provide for those, regulate them through a separate bylaw. Okay. So there are, Blue Mountain is probably a really good example of a municipality who's had to kind of go above and beyond, just given just the nature, they're a very tourist area, to try and regulate those as a way of avoiding, making sure that they're compliant with building code requirements and the fire code, but ensuring that their housing stock isn't decimated by additional residential units being converted to Airbnbs.
Okay. In this case, we're trying to create those units in the first place, right? They don't exist.
Correct.
We're trying to stimulate the establishment of units to accommodate the multiple pressures individuals and families are facing, to either stay in their own home or to facilitate someone else living on their property, whomever it might be.
Yeah, and that is correct, Your Worship. And anecdotally, I haven't seen a ton of inquiries in regards to the establishment of Airbnb units. Typically, residents looking to establish those types of uses will circulate the municipality's planning department and building department to ensure that they are compliant and what the rules are around them. But I haven't seen a swell of interest for Airbnb within North Grenville, or that style or model of rental unit.
Okay. Go ahead, Deputy
Just a
Mayor.
quick comment on that piece. It's one thing to establish as extra housing for people, of course, kids, parents, whatever. On the other side too, with the Airbnb and or the rental of that particular property, some of these folks don't want to leave their homes, so they need that extra income too. So we need to make sure we be able to fit that in as well, so that we don't cut it off that you can't rent them out or whatever, because that's part of the reason people have trouble staying in their homes, because of the cost of taxes and whatnot. So make sure that's in the provision. Thanks.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things we've heard overwhelmingly is there's a lot of seniors who can't stay in their homes without the prospect of potentially establishing a secondary unit, but the red tape around it was complicated and it was hard to navigate. So this really, I think, aims to streamline it. But to be clear, Ms. Martin, what you were saying is that we need the counties to sign off on this, that their own policies must evolve in order to recognize the legitimacy of ours.
So the United Counties is the approval authority for local official plan amendments, so we do require them to approve it. I will be having additional discussions in the coming days with the Manager of Planning Services in regards to our official plan amendment and the interpretation of their policy to see if there's anything that we can do to get this moving forward, or just, again, sitting down and looking through her interpretation of the policy to see if there's any wiggle room in that regard. Again, it's her professional opinion that she has to apply in this matter, but it was my understanding through our conversation on Monday that the counties will be looking forward to putting in provisions for additional residential units and updating the language within the policy. However, typically those matters usually just delegate down or relegate down to local municipalities to put in their official plans. It's kind of a policy that doesn't necessarily belong within a county official plan.
Yet in this instance, it is in the county official plan.
That is correct. The counties have included it as identifying a form of residential intensification. So they've created policies around it, but it could just be a matter of their policy just referring back to the local municipalities to establish their own policies on additional residential units.
And would the counties have to amend their official plan in order to allow for that to happen?
To change the language, yes. They would have to go through a county official plan amendment.
And do you believe that the language needs to be changed in order for the municipality of North Grenville to adopt its own policies?
Based on my interpretation of the policy, that wasn't my opinion. It's the county planner's definition of what she feels is a second unit is the limiting factor. But the policy language in the county's official plan does not clearly state that it can only be located within one structure or another, which is that's what I base my professional opinion off of. So at this time, it's a matter that I can take up with the county planner further and have those discussions. But I have no problem recommending to council tonight that we pass this. Ultimately, it will come before the counties to resolve as to what they do with it. And it just might be a matter of it just waits until they update their policy.
But that could be up to 2 years, could it not?
My understanding, based on conversations with the county planner, is that it's the task force recommendations will be coming. I think there's a meeting next Wednesday.
Yes.
That the recommendation for that might come sooner, and that they'd be able to act upon it quite quickly.
Okay. Well, I will also articulate that urgency for obvious reasons, because I've been speaking of the value of our secondary suites policy. So clearly, hopefully, we can resolve any impasse. Thank you. Anything else, colleagues? Okay. Councillor Barclay, you spoke to it. Would you like to move it? Councillor Strachan, thank you. And that is that council approve and enact bylaw 8821 to amend the official plan to update policies on secondary dwelling units and introduce provisions for additional residential units. Of course, I think you and I will be talking, but I think it would be helpful to apprise council of where we sit in a couple of months so that it's on the record where things stand in terms of the relationship with the United Counties.
Yes, I can do that.
Sorry, if I may, Your Worship, this is a public meeting, and we'll need to close it.
I don't think I read out, did I read anything out in regards to this? I don't, okay. So to that end, are we in a public meeting if I haven't read the script? Okay, so I will do that. Council will now open a public meeting to consider a proposed official plan amendment under Section 21 of the Planning Act to modify changes, including redefining secondary dwelling units as additional residential units and permitting an additional residential unit within a principal dwelling and in an accessory structure. This meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this meeting or written submissions before council adopts a proposed amendment, LPAT may refuse to consider. Any persons who wish further notice should approach our planner, Ms. Martin. And are there people here for this public meeting? Great. Okay, thank you. That's good to know. So we've received the explanation from Ms. Martin. Staff, council colleagues have had a chance to engage. Members of the public, is there anyone wishing to speak to this? No, you were here, but you do not wish to speak. Is that right? Okay. Okay. Is there anyone else? We don't want to leave anyone out. It is a public meeting. It's important that you are recognized. Seeing that there is no one else, then I will close the public meeting. Public meeting is closed. Motion is on the table, and I will call the question. All in favor of the updated policies on secondary dwelling units and additional residential units, please raise your hands. Good? Thank you. Okay, thank you for that catch. Okay, we're going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back. Thank you. Okay, colleagues, we'll get back into the swing of things. And we are moving. Thank you. I know some of you have been waiting a long time. We appreciate your indulgence in all of the various files we've had this evening. So many of these matters are important, and we haven't had a comprehensive planning meeting for a while. So appreciate those of you who are still watching and those of you who are still waiting. Of course, now we're going to hear from Ms. Martin on the South Gore Pit Supplemental Report. So fire away, Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. So we brought the matter back in regards to ZBA 15-19 and OPA 03-19, which pertains to the South Gore Pit. I did prepare some slides, mainly just to remind Council where the property is located and the nature of the amendments that are being sought. So the property is located on the corner of County Road 22 and Bennett Road. So South Gore Drive is the main road there, just south of County Road 43. The property is proposed to be developed as a mineral extraction pit. There is a Aggregate Resources Act application as well. So the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry are the licensing authority, but the zoning needs to be in place on the property as well to facilitate the use. So as you can see here, this just shows the different zoning designations on the property. A portion of the property is already zoned mineral aggregate extraction preservation. So it's protecting the fact that there is aggregate on the property, which is this area here. The northern portion is zoned rural. Which does not permit that extraction activity, and neither does the preservation zone. You need a mineral extraction pit zoning to permit the extraction on the lot, and there is some environmental protection zoning on the property. As for the official plan, there is a small portion, and my hatched area is covering it, or else it would just be all white. That area is rural. So the official plan amendment is looking to seek the change of the rural designation to the mineral aggregate designation. And as you will note, there is mineral aggregate designation around the property, as well as the two EP zones, which a portion are on this lot. There is an active aggregate operation just to the east. So the zoning bylaw amendment would seek to change the zoning from rural mineral aggregate preservation and I believe a small portion of the EP zone to MXP, mineral extraction pit. So if council remembers, this matter was first entertained at a public hearing all the way back in March 4th of 2020 when times were quite different. This was right before COVID hit, and it was our last public meeting that we held here in person before all the protocols came into effect. It was quite a lengthy public meeting with a abutting landowner speaking out against the application, as well as some residents in the area, each presenting their own objections and opinions as to why they were not in support of the application. If council recalls, one of the issues that council did not feel was adequately addressed at the time was the wetland features on the property, and that came through comments received from Rideau Valley Conservation. I will note that both the applicant and their consultant are here tonight, as well as Mr. Batchelor from the RVCA. I had requested that he attend in case there was any questions pertaining to the RVCA's letter, which was in response to the July 17th, 2020 memo report that was prepared by Cambium, which are the environmental consultants on this file for Cornwall Gravel. Unfortunately, their consultants aren't able to be here tonight. So if there are questions in pertaining to their technical memo, we will document them so Cornwall Gravel can take them back and get those responses if required. So the RVCA have reviewed the memo that was prepared by Cambium and has gone through with some recommendations for some amendments to the final site plan within their letter. And then earlier this summer, on July 14th of 2021, Cornwall Gravel provided a response to the RVA's comments that they would be incorporating those comments into the final site plan. The RVCA at this time is satisfied in regards to the wetland that the concerns originally that arose back in March of 2020 were addressed, and are confident that the municipality is in a position to move forward with approving the official plan amendment and the zoning bylaw amendment. I also want to address the fact that council was quite concerned at the time too about consultation with members of the public. At this time, this is not a public meeting, so there was no circulation required under the Planning Act. The neighbors, there would be no mechanism for notifying the neighbors other than the fact that we've published a public agenda with this information in it. And I've heard concern that there might be some appetite to having this matter, at least letting the residents be made aware of the information that has been presented in regards to the wetlands, and then provide them with an opportunity to provide further comments in regard to that matter, because some of the issues raised by residents pertain to the wetland features on the property back in March of 2020. So if council is not in a position tonight or comfortable making a decision, staff would recommend that you refer this matter further to allowing for just additional time for public to provide comment on the updated memo provided back in July of 2020 by Cambion and the subsequent correspondence from the RVCA and final correspondence from Cornwall Gravel. Thank you.
Colleagues? Councillor Barclay?
Do we have a list of the people who attended that meeting back in March, of the members of the public?
Through your worship, yes, we do, Councillor Barclay. So we do have to maintain a record of who attended meetings, and we also have a record of who provided comment. At that meeting, there were 4 members of the public that had attended.
Okay. Deputy Mayor?
I guess the big one was the environmental. Is it possible, I'm assuming it is, that's why he's here, that we could have the gentleman come down and in layman's terms, explain to us how all the environmental concerns have been addressed, so we have a public record of this?
Yes, and while we're at it, and thank you, Mr. Batchelor, I believe, for coming down again, I am inclined to ensure that the public is at least given a little more time to consider the information that will be presented tonight. So we hope they can watch it and live stream it later. Let's see what information you're able to put on the table. But it would be my inclination, certainly, to not pass a bylaw this evening, but to ensure that any member of our community has an opportunity to hear the exchange and potentially also follow up with the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority directly. Councillor Barclay?
And it should be relatively easy to contact people who attended, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So, Deputy Mayor, do you have direct questions, or would you just like the RVCA to make general comment?
No, it was a direct, it was explaining the environmental issues that were of concern and how they're being addressed.
Perfect.
Thank you, Your Worship. So when we were here last, there were 2 items that we had brought to Council's attention. One was the concern from a hydrologic perspective, whether there was going to be a hydrologic impact to the wetland itself based on the operation, as well as based on what their recommendations were to rehab the area once the operation ceased. That aspect, we did have some further discussions with the Ministry of Conservation and Parks, which is also reviewing this under the Aggregate Resources Act, which is happening concurrently with this application. And based on that conversation, it was understood that they were asking many of the same questions. So we made a conscious decision with MECP to not duplicate those efforts and defer that to MECP. So the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks are the ones who are addressing that through the Aggregate Resources Act. And they are going to determine whether they're satisfied that their hydrologic function of that wetland will remain. The second question or issue that we brought forward was the issue with the appropriate setbacks based on the information that was provided. Subsequent to that meeting, the applicant's biological consultants have provided significant amounts of additional information with respect to what's on site and justification as to how they came to their conclusion. They've also provided a much more thorough detailed list of how they are going to remedy the site and what the mitigation measures are. And based on that, our technical staff were of the opinion that the mitigation measures provided and the recommendations that, based on the additional information, satisfied the official plan requirements, and therefore that it could proceed subject to a few minor amendments to the documents that supported the site plan. Now, through a meeting with the municipality and the applicant and their consultants, it is our understanding that those amendments to those site plan documents, because it's also the same documents that support the Aggregate Resources Act application, to have those amended prior to the Aggregate Resources Act application being approved is a bit of a task. So the ask has been, would we accept that the commitment that those amendments are made as part of the Aggregate Resources Act application and not necessarily in the documents as part of the zoning amendment. And we have agreed that that is something that could proceed. It does not change the substance of the zoning bylaw amendment that is before council, and therefore we are satisfied that if the municipality is satisfied with all other aspects, that it could move forward on that basis.
You spoke to another agency being in the process of reviewing but not having completed that process, is that right?
That's correct, Your Worship. So under the Aggregate Resources Act, the Ministry of Environment and Conservation and Parks reviews it from a hydrological perspective. So they would review all those documents and determine whether they are satisfied to the hydrologic function of that wetland, and is it being maintained appropriately both during operation and after operation ceases as part of the rehab. And then they also involve the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to deal with some of the species at risk issues, which is not within the purview of the Conservation Authority. And then the ultimate approval authority is the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry under that Aggregate Resources Act.
Okay, but in terms of preparing for any bylaw changes, are you suggesting that there's another agency that's still in the process of evaluating impact?
Not for the zoning bylaw amendment. They would be only reviewing it under the Aggregate Resources Act portion. But some of the same issues overlap with the zoning bylaw amendment.
Okay. I believe there's a lot of information here, so I think it would be beneficial for members of the public to have some opportunity to digest. But colleagues, any other question? I note in the document, it says there is a revision to site plan condition 1.11.27 as it is factually incorrect. Can you speak to the factually incorrect element of the application? And you note the presence of some bats, which may or may not be species at risk. Do you want to provide some context there just for council?
I'll just have to check this because this was done by our technical staff, that comment. So.
Okay. They refer to preserving woodland area for sensitive breeding habitat. So I don't quite understand what the factual error would have been. Is it in regards to not sufficiently documenting the presence of wildlife? And again, we don't mean to put you on the spot. I think because council does have an appetite to have more conversation, then perhaps that's something that you can bring back at a different meeting.
Yeah, I believe that would be something that I'd want to consult our biologist who wrote those comments.
Okay, perfect. Council, any other questions while we have Mr. Batchelor here? Deputy Mayor?
Yeah, again, I kind of asked for layman's terms for this hydrologic study. What are we looking for here? What's the concept of this? What's the bad or the pros and cons of this? Or like, you know, if you do this study, what are we looking for that, okay, we can't go ahead with this project or we can go ahead? Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah, so through your worship, what we're looking for in that particular case is, for example, if it is a pit that's going forward, is that operation going to dewater the wetland and inhibit it from continuing to act as a wetland, or is, if it is impacting it, is the impact going to be significant enough that it changes the diversity and the species and how it functions currently? So that's to do not only from the operation standpoint, but also how does the rehab of that site impact the hydrologic function of that wetland? So we wanted to make sure that there wasn't going to be a dewatering of that wetland, essentially.
Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship, to Mr., sorry, I forget.
Bachelor.
Thank you. I need my memory refreshed, but if I'm correct, there was a time limit for this pit to be operational, that if I'm correct, it was somewhere in the neighborhood of only 2 or 3 years, the active time that's remaining on this pit. Is that correct?
Through your worship, that is not something that we would ourselves deal with. That would be
Okay.
more associated with the Aggregate Resources Act.
Okay, maybe Director Martin would know?
Through your worship, to Councillor Sullivan, I believe, and it's my understanding, more so in conversation with the applicant, that it's a 2-year time frame from when an application is made to when a decision needs to be made by the ministry. I'll just, and the applicant is nodding that that is the correct interpretation.
So it would only be fully operational for about 2 years once it opens?
Through your worship, no, that is the timeline in which a decision has to be made on the Aggregate Resources Act application. The applicant is here tonight. Maybe
Okay.
if you have some more specific questions about the time frame for which the operation would run for, he would certainly be more than happy to come and provide those answers for you.
Okay, I'll get that then if I could. And regarding the rehabilitation after, would it be to close it in and restore it as much as possible? And the other question was regarding impact on farmland and crops. If I'm correct, some members of the public had made that comment regarding photosynthesis of their crops, et cetera, from dust, et cetera. So has that concern been addressed?
If I could, through your worship, just address that comment, and I'm certain representatives from Cornwall Gravel will speak to it as well, if given the opportunity. The plan would be, once the resource has been extracted from the property, that there would be 2 essentially ponds left on the property, that just by the nature of the removal of the sand within the area. As for addressing the matter in regard to the concern from the property owner to the east in the impact of the dust on photosynthesis, that isn't something that was addressed as part of the environmental features, and I'm not certain if that's something that the applicant can address or can provide some information through their experts on that topic.
Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Strachan.
Through you, Madam Mayor, and I'm not sure which one of you can answer this. I'm just trying to get a sense of what I'm looking at here on, not this map, but the one that's more sort of the top of, yes, this one here. So I'm seeing lots of significant woodland and provincially significant woodland and et cetera, and they seem to all go around that sort of middle piece there, and there's nothing identified within that inner rectangular kind of shape. And then when I look up to the sort of upper left quadrant, I see the MXAP and significant woodland sort of right next to each other. So I'm just trying to get a sense of, what is actually overlapping here, because with a lot of those significant wetland, woodland areas, how much are we saying is significant, and then we're saying at the same time we want to change the designation of that area, because they seem to be just sort of all nicely separated.
Through your worship, to Councillor Strachan, I'm not certain if this map might be a little better to show the land use designations as established through the official plan. This is more of the zoning layer showing the different zones. But they don't overlap each other. This is from Land Use Schedule A, so this is the land use designation. My hatched area here is white underneath, and similar to this area here, which indicates that it has rural land use designations. There is a larger environmental protection wetland over here that, I mean, here's the county road that runs up that is bisected by the county road, and you have some environmental features that are identified on the property, but as well as the properties to the east. And then the rest of the land is identified as having aggregate resources. As you can tell, it's the two resources are very predominant in this area. We do, like I said, have an active mineral aggregate operation here. It's not uncommon where you see these types of uses abut each other, and we have quite a few areas within North Grenville where that is the case. I'm hoping this map provides maybe a little bit of a clear, I didn't know that the hatching's somewhat similar, but it should be able to differentiate between the environmental feature, which is the grassy hatching, versus the rock hatching for the aggregate.
So if we go back to the previous example there, where if we look up at the sort of the upper left quadrant where it does have that significant woodland and then the MXAP separated from it, like those are separate distinct features as far as the follow-on, the other one that you showed, like those are separate? Because I'm just trying to figure out, because if there's significant areas that are have somewhat sensitive nature to them, whether they're protecting animals or so on, that if we're overlaying that with another designation, that those would, could contradict as far as their use goes, or what we should be doing with it.
Through your worship, to Councillor Strachan, so this is more, especially more the topography, maybe some coloring for the property line would be a benefit. So this is the location of the property. The environmental feature, the EP zone is indicated here, so there's a small portion and indicated here as well. And then there's, like I mentioned, there's a more of a wetland complex located further west of the property. Majority of this lot would fall within the influence area of these environmental protection zones, which is why we require the necessary studies to address impact. But a majority of the area is outside of the EP zone, and the proposed zoning would not remove these features, maybe except for a small portion up here, which I believe, based on the topography, I can't really tell. It's very faint if there's any vegetation on there, if it's been cleared, because there is farming activity that's occurred on the southern portion. But the intent, and I'll just jump to the zoning map just to show you here, and it's overlaid over the land use designations, because the zoning map with the colors would just go a little wonky on your eyes. But it's showing here that they are maintaining the environmental features, and it's not the entire property being rezoned, it is a portion of the property.
Okay, one final question. The tags that are on the previous one that identify significant woodland and wetland and so on, there are none of those labels within that portion of that inner rectangle. Is that accurate to say that none of those areas within that portion then have a designation, or however you want to call it, of significant woodland in that area? Like that's all outside of that area?
Through your worship, I would want to review our natural heritage official plan designation to give you more of a fulsome answer. What I can say is our official plan does not have policies currently for significant woodlands, so we go back and rely on the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry's manual that they have for woodlands. This map was taken from the report provided by the consultant, and it was just a better way of kind of illustrating with that topographical map underneath as to what's going on with the property. These labels were added by the consultants. They don't reflect our zoning bylaw. It's additional information just saying that there are woodlands, but I did want to iterate that we do not define significant woodlands within our official plan. Doesn't mean that we won't in the future. We definitely have that ability to, because I do understand the importance of just conservation and the environment. But to that end, I know that it's on there, but these lands here would have an environmental protection zoning, just given the fact that they are recognized as being wetlands. And it's quite common that you will have wetlands that also have a significant woodland designation as well as through that natural heritage mapping that we are required to do as part of our official plan.
Okay, thank you.
Through your worship, I will endeavor, if council defers this matter, to maybe provide a little more information on the area around the property based off our official plan mapping.
That'd be appreciated. Thank you very much, Director Martin. And of course, that was all through you, Madam Mayor. Sorry.
Of course. I was fascinated by the line of questioning, because I think when you see different land uses or land designations within close proximity, we're lay people, right? We don't have the expertise that the Conservation Authority and others bring to the table. I think it's hard for us to get our head around how do you preserve sensitive habitat while at the same time extracting aggregate in large quantities from land in close proximity to everything else. So, we heard loud and clear from some of the residents that there were concerns. We appreciate the supplementary information, but I sense, colleagues, tonight that I think we do have an appetite to defer the matter and make sure that certainly concerned members of the public, we know aggregate file is a hot file across the province, but we certainly do our best to share the information that's been provided tonight and also get some additional insight into how this all works. So with that in mind, we'll look to a motion to defer then, colleagues. Councillor Strachan, Councillor Sullivan, did you have a question as well, or you were just seconding the motion? Okay, excellent. So then to that end will be, yes? I'm sorry? I was just going to summarize the motion. So of course we will defer any consideration of the bylaw 8921 to adopt official plan amendments in regards to the mineral aggregate in discussion this evening. And I will call the question, or you have a question. You have a question. I thought you were saying, call the question. I'm like, okay, I understand now. Please, fire away.
Through you, Madam Mayor.
Indeed.
Just a question, comment, just to Amy. So you'll follow up with more information for us before we have another meeting with, potentially with the residents of the area. So we have the more background based on the comments we made. And that report, the MECP, they're addressing the hydrologic. Will we have that available shortly, or, I think that's a major piece, I suspect, for that land. So I don't know. But anyways, I'd like to know more about that. Like, what are the provisions? What are we doing to make sure that this is, everything's in place and we have no concerns? Because that was a big one that the residents brought up, not just for the wetlands themselves, but if also the farming around there. Some would mention that if you drain the water table there goes their corn crops and those kind of things. So those are concerns. So I just want to make sure we've addressed those.
Through your worship, to the deputy mayor, I will work with the applicant and their consultants to get some additional information on their response to the hydrogeological questions and the information that they provided to the ministry, and to see if they've had any further response from the ministry on that matter.
I think you're hearing from council that we like the time to be taken, so no need to rush this back in October. If you need more time, that would be helpful. Are we under any legislated deadlines here in terms of consideration of this file?
Thank you, Your Worship. I believe that the applicants from the Aggregate Resources Act timeline do have specific timelines that they need to meet. We, through discussion, they had requested this matter come back at our September meeting. So if there were additional considerations that were given, that we'd have a little bit of extra time. But I believe it is in early 2022 that this matter needs to be addressed by the ministry, which is the push to to seek consideration again on this matter now that they brought additional information forward in regards to the environmental features on the property.
Okay, go ahead, Deputy Mayor.
Just my council colleagues, there's a little reminder here. There was mention of, and this was only really from one resident, I don't know if it's accurate or not, but was there any kind of study done on whether there's an Indigenous grave site on the property?
Through your worship to the Deputy Mayor, an archaeological study was completed as part of the submission requirements through the Aggregate Resources Act application. And I do not have it in front of me, but I do not believe they found anything of significance. The applicant is here if you'd like to ask him that question in regards to it, or it could just be an item that we follow up on and just provide confirmation at a subsequent meeting.
So there are representatives from Cornwall Gravel, or their representatives are here?
Tracy Sander is here from Zander Plan, who is the planner on file, and Travis Mitchell is here from Cornwall Gravel this evening.
Okay. Would you like that answered by Cornwall Gravel?
If the applicants would like to speak to us, I'm open to that. We would mind your input.
All right, for the archaeology aspect, we've had a full archaeological review done, and we did that in consultation with the Algonquins of Ontario. So I went up to do a presentation to them. We've got their sign off, and there are no artifacts that were found on the site during the studies.
Okay, thanks.
If there's any of the other questions that you'd like answered relating to I guess, the adjacent crops, I can provide some commentary on that if you'd like to hear it. If not, that's okay too.
Sure, on the crop question, go ahead.
Sure, just a couple of things. So for the agricultural and mineral reserve, we have a lot of properties where they operate adjacent. A lot of our sand pits we rent out to farmers, and we've never had any issues with dust on crops. So we have, I think 700 or 800 acres that we rent out adjacent to our properties, and we've never had any complaints. And in addition, part of the site plan requirements are we have to mitigate dust on site. So whether that's through applying calcium or water to roads, there's provisions in the site plans where dust has to be mitigated on site.
Okay.
Relating to work around wetlands, we've been consulting with, it's the Ministry of Natural Resources, their hydrogeologist. I had a meeting with them about a month ago, and we're going to be doing some additional work installing wells adjacent to the wetlands. So there's a 30-meter setback around all the wetlands. The mapping that you have up there is from the Ministry of Natural Resources, and it's not entirely accurate. That's based off air photos, and they kind of draw a line on the map. We've had our consultants ground truth it, and they've revised the wetland boundaries. They're working with the ministry right now to reflect that in their official mapping, which it looks like they're going to do. So the one of the other site plans shows the actual boundaries, and there's a 30-meter setback around all those boundaries. That was one of the things that we were working with from our consultants and RVCA to say that's an appropriate setback. Work that's coming up, we're going to be installing 3 wells in that and installing data loggers, which are going to take water level readings daily. And we're going to use that information as the pit progresses to evaluate the impacts on those wetlands, if there are any, and have an adaptive management plan where if you're seeing those impacts, how are we going to respond to it? Do we increase the buffer? Do you stop development? And that will be undertaken through an annual review by a qualified professional.
And you were with Cornwall Gravel?
Yes,
you are
I'm with Cornwall Gravel,
You're
yes.
Okay, excellent,
Yes.
thank you.
As far as timeline goes, you asked about the time to operate the pit. There's approximately 2.5 million tons of aggregate there. On average, we use 40 to 50,000 tons a year. If you call it 50, that's 50 years, give or take. I think that's really all the notes that I had to discuss. So if there's any other questions, I'd be happy to address them.
And what's the size of the property you want rezoned for this additional aggregate?
The entire property is 160 acres. I think that the license area, I'd have to confirm, I think it's 60 60 hectares or 68. It's more than 60 acres. I think it's 60 hectares is the total size of the.
Additional lands?
No, that'd be the total size of the extractable lands.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you own beyond that, but you're looking specifically for the,
Yeah, so
somebody-
up in kind of the northeast corner where the wetlands are, that's not being developed. It's environmental protection, so we're leaving that setback. Some of the other things that we had to do is to leave a berm in between the ponds and vegetate that for wildlife crossing, to facilitate preserving that land to the northeast.
okay. Okay, so there is a motion on the table, but I'll go to Councillor Barclay and the Deputy Mayor.
Yeah, this updated map showing a more accurate picture of where the wetlands are we in possession of that, or?
It's reflected on one of the other pages of the site plans, which you guys would have.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if you're in possession of it tonight, but
Oh.
it's been provided to the municipality as part of the review.
Okay. Just confirm that with Director Martin. Do we have that updated map?
Through your worship to Councillor Barkley, yes, we do have the updated studies that were provided in response, and I will endeavor to get a copy as part of the upcoming report when this matter is brought back forward, just to demonstrate the changes.
And Ms. Martin, I know in the last meeting we talked about, the meeting almost 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, there was some discussion about what the compensation policy is, right, for aggregate extraction. Has the province updated its compensation structure for municipalities? Because there is a small amount that comes to municipality. I know it's extremely modest. Am I remembering that correctly?
Thank you, Your Worship. Yes, I'm not aware that it's been updated. Mr. Mitchell might be better suited to answer that question, being in the aggregate industry.
Okay,
Yeah,
sure.
it's updated annually, and it's tied with inflation.
Okay,
So I think right now it's around 21 cents a ton, which,
that's right.
like you said, it's
Yeah.
not a lot. I think the big increase comes with a change in the designation of the property through property taxes. That's where you're probably going to see a
I
bigger
see.
difference.
Okay, thanks. I appreciate that. Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Just a question for Director. That berm, I remember reading about it, but I don't think it was mentioned on our very first meeting. This is something new that was required, and where is it running? And again, can you explain the purpose of it?
Through your worship to the Deputy Mayor, maybe Mr. Mitchell could point out, it might have a better idea of a sense on the mapping. Just, I don't know if you might, the arrow is this one. The pointer.
So there will be a pond in the southern section of the property and one in the northern section. Along here, in between the two ponds, this is where there will be a berm left to facilitate that wildlife crossing. It'll be 30 meters wide. I think in the original it was 10, and it's been increased to 30.
Okay. Councillor Sullivan?
Thank you. Just one clarification. The significant woodland that will be remaining, is that correct? Where it, up on the top right corner?
What about it? Just if it will remain?
It will be remaining there,
Yeah,
is
it's
that
not-
correct?
it's not within
So the pit
the-
will be down, pit will be kind of where that red is, so
Yeah, that will be
if
outside
that was
of the extraction.
superimposed on top of the other one, where the little cutout is, would be the bottom of the environmental protection area in the middle?
Yeah, the
Yeah.
woodlands are going to be outside of the extraction area. So that red area reflects the extraction area. On the western side of the property, it's mostly open meadow on the north part. The woodlands is more to the east, which is outside of the extraction area.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. If there's nothing else, I'd like to call the question on this. Are we good to call the question? And that is on a deferral. Okay, all in favor, please? Good. Thank you. Thank you for being here this evening. Okay. So, colleagues, it's 9 o'clock. We have 3 other items, one of which is extremely fulsome, and that's the Affordable Housing Strategy Implementation Plan. I'm looking to you to see if in fact that is the one item we could defer to next Wednesday, unless there's a timing issue, Ms. Martin, because it is late, and I actually think there could be the possibility of substantial discussion, and I don't know if we want to do that at this hour. Is there, if we delayed it to our September 21st meeting, does that present any challenges for you?
Yes, it does, Your Worship. I will not be at the September 21st meeting, and I cannot be at the September 21st meeting. My recommendation would be, I mean, the implementation strategy is before you. I don't think there would be any harm in pushing it to the October meeting, just for an update as to where we're at. Staff will continue to work on these matters, regardless of this report coming forward to council. It was just an information piece as to how we're...
It was just an information piece?
Yes.
Right. Okay. Go ahead, Councillor Barclay.
Yeah, I would suggest that we attack it. I don't know why you would think there'd be.
Well, I have some
substantive
significant
discussion.
questions, actually,
Do
in
you?
terms of
Okay.
implementation, so perhaps we can do two things. We can, should other members of council have questions this evening, we can receive the report. I'm just trying to square this with some of my work at the United Counties, so I do have some questions for Amy, but it may be better to bring those questions back at our first October meeting if there's nothing time sensitive about this in terms of enactment of policy. Right.
Thank you, Your Worship. The intent of the report is just to provide council with an update as to how we're going to implement. It's purely for information purposes. There is no action points that are coming out of it that we need council's support on. It's just, again, going through the 31 recommendations within the strategy and how they're going to be implemented. Staff are already working on more of the what I would consider the low-hanging fruit. We can have a conversation in October, or we can have a conversation tonight. It won't change the content of the report from now to a month from now.
Indeed. So we can take it so far. I will work with the clerk's office to get it back on the agenda for early October. But in the meantime, colleagues, if you want to go down this path this evening, you're more than welcome. Councillor Strachan?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I would be comfortable with receiving the report and having it for information purposes without any further discussion this evening and bringing it back later, if that, at least it resolves that piece of the agenda to receive it.
Yes, absolutely, we can do that. I mean, Amy, I think you've prepared a presentation, right, about all the steps?
Thank you, Your Worship. The presentation is more so, I've just provided the executive summary with the recommendation. I wasn't going to walk through every single recommendation, but more so speak in general as to how we're going to implement which items will be coming forward, sooner than later, and which items that we're going to need to just based on the requirements and what's needed to implement those, just more of a longer timeline as to when you'll see those come forward.
Okay. Okay. So do we want to move to a motion to receive the report with the intention of bringing it back for our October meeting? Deputy Mayor?
Through you, Madam Mayor. Yes. But do you have a Coles Note 2-minute quick explanation so we can think about this and then bring it to a meeting later? Like, we won't ask any questions, but if you can just give us a high overview.
Yeah, and maybe to that end, Amy, Ms. Martin, I'm confused about what happened earlier. I don't understand the invocation of good faith agreements, because it's been my understanding with developers like Kevlar that we are moving to impose thresholds. So perhaps that's one piece that you could help to explain. I think it needs more discussion that I'm not sure I have the energy for this evening, but just perhaps that's something you can tackle as part of your explanation. Coles Notes version.
Yeah. So a Coles Note version, Your Worship, on the implementation of the recommendations. As you will see, the recommendation was broken down into 3 groupings, being policy and zoning, programs and processes, and then partnerships, education, and funding. So staff, myself, and the deputy director went through the recommendations together to identify realistically items that could come forward. And as you'll note in the report, there are a lot of policy implications that can be grouped together. So we were anticipating by the end of this year to bring forward, now again, some of that might be contingent on the counties, a majority of the policy recommendations for council's consideration. In regards to the programs and processes, there are a larger tasks that were involved. So staff were looking at the 2022 year to start the development or working towards the implementation of those, although some items are ongoing. So typically we'll see things like our monitoring program, which we currently do not have a program in place to monitor the creation and maintenance of affordable housing programs, putting something together. Items pertaining to the Affordable Housing Advisory Committee is going to take more time. And then one of the recommendations was staff was going to come back with a report in regards to a public consultation process as we further develop our affordable housing policy. So we have, especially when we're starting to touch on official plan items and establishing targets, working with our development community, our partner agencies, and our different levels of government that provide housing. And then there's certain items that, just inherent by their nature, were ongoing. And then, again, kicking it off with the introduction of the additional residential units tonight as a way of getting the ball rolling. But certainly, if council should wish, I can go through and highlight in the October meeting more of how we're going to implement it. And to that end, we can maybe address kind of what the implications are right now in regards to our affordable housing policy within the official plan, what tools we have now, and highlight maybe some of the shortfalls that might answer the question tonight that came up with the zoning bylaw amendment, as to which my response is that we didn't, based on the proposed development, didn't have the mechanism through density bonusing to require affordable housing as a provision of the zoning bylaw amendment. Which makes it harder when we have developments that do meet the requirements of our policies, that don't need density bonusing, to really have that tool to require it. So I think that's where I can, in addition to this, maybe highlight a little more of what our current shortfalls are and how an affordable housing policy through that consultation strategy would help address those situations where we might not have the teeth to ask for affordable housing units.
Okay, I have a question too, if you don't mind. So the amendment to the official plan to make minimum density target and affordable housing targets applicable to every residential development application, as opposed to a citywide blended average, has not been pursued. We have not pursued that amendment. Is that correct?
That is correct, Your Worship. Currently, the provision within the official plan amendment, the official plan itself, is that it's averaged over 25% averaged over a period of 3 years. When you don't adequately track the affordable housing target itself, it's very hard to determine if we're actually achieving that target, which was one of the recommendations from the strategy itself. So to that end, that's part of that consultation piece and us reviewing our official plan policies, as well as what other standards are out there in other municipal official plans to see is there a better standard to achieve that requirement for affordable housing.
And given that there was an ambitious and well-informed task force that got us to 18 plus recommendations, I'm curious to know more about consultation plans moving forward, right? I think the hope was that through this mandate of this term of council, for which I think the mandate around affordable housing was fairly clear, that further consultation rounds would be pretty focused, right? So I think I'm trying to reconcile task force recommendations with the how, which is very complex, right, given the policy landscape, and I totally accept that. And I want to recognize that I know you have a deputy director who I think is spending a lot of time and energy on this. So I think our planning capacity will get better. But from a timing perspective, I know that I, and I think other members of council perhaps, but certainly me, have an interest in expediting some of these things so that the bar is set and some of that policy is entrenched. And I assume not yet pursuing the amendment on the minimum density targets to make it applicable to every residential development, if that's the way we go, right, is pending in part because you're looking for the critical path. Is that correct?
So Your Worship, the the policy and zoning recommendations, I mean, that's the items that we're hoping to bring forth sooner than later. Inherent in the fact that we have to hold public meetings to amend our bylaws and to amend our official plan under the Planning Act provides that consultation piece. However, we're hoping, and we can definitely try to aim for the October meeting to provide council with a more fulsome report as to how we're going to engage. I know that we're already engaged with our development community through our pre-consultation process. They're all very aware of the appetite at this table for affordable housing and the requirement for affordable housing. And a big piece of that is looking at our density requirements and if there's opportunity to increase it so we can permit a little more development on little smaller lots, like not smaller lots, but allow for the creation of more units. But to that end, I'm hearing loud and clear that council and as part of the recommendation, not the recommendation, but as part of the outline provided within the report was to do just that, to provide council with the action plan as to how we're going to consult the public, who we're going to consult, and what are we trying to achieve. I've had lots of interest from many different individuals in the community who would love to have input on this process. And to help provide Made in North Grenville solutions as to how we can address it. Because I'm more than certain the development community would love the opportunity to have their input versus just having policies imposed on them without having their ability to provide some feedback on that system, because we do work with them quite closely.
Right, well, I'm very respectful of the development community and their aspirations for this community. As you've suggested, it's residents, right, who are really suffering in terms of not being able to access affordable housing, or future residents. So, yeah, it would be wonderful, I think, to hear more about the mandated consultation processes, but also what we envision, given that there was an affordable housing task force, and that task force is not the be-all, end-all. But I think moving more quickly so we establish those standards, right, as subdivision applications come in, as lots of different applications come in, is, I think, pretty important at this stage. Councillor Barclay, thank you for your patience.
Thanks. I understand the urgency in that we struck a task force right off the bat, and they have recommendations. But I also am aware that we're looking at 31 recommended action items, and we need time to have a fulsome discussion about it. So I have a suggestion, if we're coming back later, to attack this document, that under the time frame you have a short 0 to 2 years, maybe we could focus on what are the immediate actions we can take, policy changes we can make. I know we've done something today with additional units, residential units, which affects the rental housing market. So maybe I think it would be useful, because we do want to get things clarified for the development community so they know where they stand, that we have, a short list of those items that are 0 to 2 years. What things can we do, not to be too obvious about it, within our existing mandate in the next 12 months.
And there is a 0 to 2 year timeline, right, which is very, I think, well featured, and perhaps that's where you can focus some of your energies in the next presentation.
Yeah.
But I'm just late, and maybe my own energy levels are declining to the point of wanting to be argumentative, but the task force delivered its report in March 2020. So we're now 18 months later, and I think our planning department is amazing and much better equipped, and we needed to build it, right? So that there was that capacity, but you can understand the sense of urgency I think we're all feeling. I don't think we're rushing things. I think we've had, obviously, to make significant investments in staff who are well equipped to navigate these complex waters. And Amy, I want to thank you, because I know that this has been a priority file for you, and you've now attracted other staff who want to see it happen, which is wonderful. But you can imagine those task force members who may not have the same insight into our municipal operations wondering why we haven't quite moved yet. But I think the October meeting is an excellent opportunity to give us a little more insight into how that happens. Councillor Strakian?
Through you, Madam Mayor. So yes, thank you very much, Director Martin. I think this is, you've made lots of progress. There's, we're light years ahead, I think, of where we were 18 months or beyond that ago. So I think, the consultation piece, absolutely. I mean, I don't think we want to go into this with only hearing from, a certain part of the community. I think the developers side of things, we have to be able to look at all aspects of it. So hearing from everybody, that consultation is necessary. Looking at that 0 to 2 years timeframe, though, I think if we make good progress on those items and are able to fully check them off and address them, it forces whatever the next council looks like to move into that 3 to 5 year range, right? It sort of already sets the stage for that, so that we don't leave, if we try to tackle all of it and we don't accomplish any of it, then anything could happen next time, depending on who's through to the next council. So I agree with Councillor Barclay that focusing on that short-term time frame, I think, would be the best use of our time, and I think of everybody's time, and making sure that we can bring it all together. I think going back to the decision that was made earlier today regarding those rental units, I think that understanding where we can make those changes and where we can insist upon affordable housing, it's great to have more rental opportunities. I know that there's a shortage of that, but at the same time, a 3-bedroom rental property at market value may not be affordable at all for folks who need it as well. So I think that figuring out what that balance is and being able to do that, and really putting it down on paper where council doesn't have a choice. I don't want us to be in a position of picking and choosing based on, different circumstances or different perspectives on the given day. And I think that we need to make sure that that's well understood by all of us and by the public at large as well. So yeah, any progress that we can continue to make is appreciated. So thank you very much for the time that you and the rest of the staff have spent on this.
All I can say are that there's limits to moral suasion, right? So that's why having policies on the books allow us to go beyond that. And I know in Amy's conversations, which are more frequent than mine with the development community, if you don't have the policy, then it's much tougher. And I think, that being said, we've had a very willing development community to a large extent, and they want to play ball. So bringing it all together will be nice to see. Okay, so can we move to receive the report then? Okay, Councillor Strakian, do you want to move? Deputy Mayor, second. And that is that we receive the report titled Affordable Housing Strategy Implementation for information purposes, and look forward to a second conversation in October. Sound good? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? Now, the next piece is exciting because I think a reallocation of funds will enable some additional capacity. Is that right, Ms. Martin?
That is correct, Your Worship. Okay. So staff are here tonight seeking approval from council to reallocate $46,300 from our planning reserve to fund the development of a housing strategy. So what I want to highlight is that affordable housing is just one piece of the puzzle when it comes to housing. CMHE identifies a variety, a continuum of housing as to which needs to be addressed, from the lowest form being emergency shelters, through transitional housing, supportive housing, affordable housing, all the way up to home ownership. So we've just started to scratch the surface in regards to affordable housing, and there's a need to do more in regards to just establishing a more fulsome housing strategy. So to that end, staff went out and obtained quotes. We went to 3 firms and received 2 quotes. As you can tell, the planning department's very busy, and every other planning firm out there reports just being as busy as we are, which is fantastic to see that there's lots of growth and development going around. But staff's recommending that we go with SHS Consulting, which would get us to having a housing strategy prepared for us. Now, a housing strategy would provide kind of that more fulsome view. It would help us define what is the municipality's role within housing, looking at our existing policies, making policy recommendations, but ultimately providing us that toolkit that we need to effectively influence housing across the spectrum. And I did meet with the proposed consulting team that I would like to go with today, just to update the housing strategy. And from an implementation standpoint and work plan, we'd be looking at a end of May timeline for having this in place. So I'm very excited, and I know that the CAO is very supportive of the creation of a housing strategy as well, just to better position the municipality in regards to our housing policies ahead of our official plan update in 2023. And I would also note that we will be drawing from our reserves, and as part of the 2022 budget, consideration could be given to help replenish those reserves. And the intent of our planning reserve is, in fact, to help cover these costs where we might have a study that comes up that we want to conduct that we didn't necessarily plan for within the budget. So to that end, if council has any questions in regards to what we're trying to achieve in regards to the housing study, I can definitely answer that. I will say that there will be extensive public consultation built into this process. The firm that I would like to go with, it prides themselves on the fact that you cannot do a housing strategy without consulting the community and the stakeholders across the spectrum. So really excited to go down this path.
So after the discussion we've just had, of course, these things will work hand in hand, right? 1 to 2 year, right, objectives for affordable housing still proceed as quickly as possible. And this effort is around a larger assessment of what housing looks like in North Granville writ large. Is that correct? Is that the kind of distinction we're making?
That is correct. So the consulting firm is aware of the fact that we do have an affordable housing strategy, and we'll take that into consideration as they develop it. But again, looking at our role in regards to matters such as, supportive housing, transitional housing, the rental creation, policies that we, where can we have influence, identifying the partnerships that we need to get to where we're going. And I mean, we've had, there's been different conversations about different forms of housing, kind of out there, out in the community, but as well internally here as we pre-consult. And there's definitely a desire for alternative forms of housing as a way of trying to create, whether it's an affordable solution or something that just meets the changing community dynamic.
Good, okay. As long as we're not unnecessarily waiting for consultations for short-term objectives, I hear you, and I think it's wise. Okay, looking for a mover, please. Councilor Strachan over here, McManaman, thank you. Okay, be it resolved that, no, I think I have the wrong one. Okay, I put it in wrong. Okay. Strachan, McManaman, be it resolved that council approve the reallocation of $46,300 from the planning reserve to fund the development of a housing strategy as distinct from affordable housing. All in favor, please.
No, I've got a question.
Sure.
Sorry.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah,
Yep.
I'd be interested in seeing the scope of work that we, put out there in terms of requesting an RFP. Is that possible to see?
Through your worship, yes, Councilor Berkeley, I can submit the document that I sent around for a request for quotes.
Okay, good. Any other questions before I call the question? Okay, calling vote. All in favor, please. Good. Thank you. And then I think we're on, council, to our last agenda item, God willing. That would be the Municipal Modernization Program Transfer Payment Agreement. I think it's fairly self-evident. Is anyone speaking to that this evening?
I'm speaking to that.
Okay, go ahead.
The Department of Finance is requesting council approve and enact bylaw 9221 to authorize entering into a transfer payment agreement with the Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. This funding is in the amount of $80,000 and will be allocated to a service delivery review through the Municipal Modernization Program Intake 2. We are required to use the funds to engage a third-party consultant to evaluate the best practices to modernize the municipality's business practices. This agreement is moving forth this evening as it must be signed and submitted to the minister by September 20th.
Great, thank you. And to flag, this was an application that was made in early, I want to say 2020, and was just approved a year and some later. So good news, because you might recall, council, that we worked with our former Director of Finance, Mr. Marcus Hewitt, on a service delivery review. And believe it or not, these funds are just flowing. So as we come out of COVID, this modernization money or fund was sort of reactivated. So great to see that we get the support to look at a service delivery review, because as council knows and the public knows, we're receiving requests all the time to either modify or increase service levels. So great to see this come. Councillor Sullivan, would you like to move this? Okay. Councillor Barclay, do you want a second? Good. Are there any questions, concerns? Seeing none, I am going to call the question. I think this is a good news story. All in favor, please. Thank you. Good. All right. So I think that takes us to the end of our substantive agenda, if I'm not mistaken. We have no informational reports, no correspondence. We've tackled all the motions. Are there any notice of motions this evening? Scanning the room, see no notice of motions. Then we'll move on to period of questions. Of course, people are allowed back in.
Sorry, there is an introduction bylaw this evening. So there's one bylaw to be passed under the introduction section this evening. On September 7th, Council appointed Neil Harrington as a line fence viewer and approved the introduction of the bylaw. This is the administrative function to finalize the passing of the bylaw for Mr. Harrington's appointment for staff to move forward with a line fence viewing request. So this is for bylaw 9121.
Excellent. Who would like to move that bylaw, please? Adoption of that bylaw. We need a mover. Barclay McManaman. Thank you. I'll call the question in regards to that. All in favor? Thank you. Is there any other bylaw to bring to my attention? No? Okay. Are there any questions from members of the public or the media, Jess, that you would have received by email?
No additional questions.
No additional questions. We have no one left in the audience, so we will move on. I'm sure all of our items this evening have spurred some debate and discussion, so we'll hear it in the days ahead. So I'll move to the confirmation bylaw, and if you could read that, please.
Be it resolved that bylaw 9321 to confirm the proceedings of council at its regular meeting held on September 15th, 2021 be adopted and passed.
I'll look to a mover and a seconder. Councillor O'Sullivan, Councillor Strachian. I'll call the question. All in favor, please. Confirmation bylaw. Move to adjourn. Councillor Barclay, Deputy Mayor. I assume we're good to adjourn. I think we're retesting our stamina. We've got a motion to adjourn at 9:26 p.m. It's been moved and seconded. All in favor, please. Good. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.